Dear friends, I think I have a really interesting story to tell you. The synchronicity of events all over the world is, in a somewhat eerie way, astonishing. Everywhere, things are coming to a head. The fog of propaganda and manipulation is clearing so fast now that our happy ending is clearly visible. But there's a rough road ahead of us, at least of me. Despite all the efforts of the usual suspects in the mainstream media and politicians, this past Sunday's EU elections resulted in the warmongers and economic destroyers losing heavily, and those who criticize them for it winning massively. The Belgian Prime Minister stepped down, and the French puppet of the World Economic Forum was forced to dissolve Parliament. The German Chancellor is reduced to the status of a largely incapacitated lame duck. Sure, mainstream media and politicians immediately scrambled to ramp up their propaganda and manipulation machine as soon as they heard the results, but it is too late. They've lost control. Those who have woken up, among them now many young people, will not go back to sleep. In fact, it is the young generation that, with their worldwide student protests, made sure that the monsters' attempts at concealing the horrific massacres in Gaza failed. Not so much in Germany, but in the rest of the world, it failed. One day before the EU elections, another military raid in Gaza with tanks and fighter jets killed 274 Palestinians and injured more than 700. Even though 4 hostages were freed, 3 others, according to TRT, the Turkish broadcaster that has journalists on the ground there, 3 others were killed. Since October of last year, more than 37,000 Palestinians were killed, 70% of whom are women and children, and more than 85,000 Palestinians were injured. 15,000 children are dead, and 1,000 children lost a limb, that is, an arm and or a leg. Anyone who has seen these images, and TRT does have journalists on the ground there that have witnesses and they captured the images, anyone who has seen these images will never be able to unsee them. If only half of what the journalists who were there tell us with their pictures and their witnesses, if only half of this is true, then none of those who are responsible will ever get out of prison again. The Turkish President Erdogan called Netanyahu, and I'm sure he chose his words carefully and deliberately, a psychopath and a bloodthirsty vampire. But in protest of the indiscriminate and chaotic horror in Gaza, an important member of Netanyahu's war cabinet resigned. And here's something else. 2 brave Israeli journalists uncovered through their research that the former chief prosecutor of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, at the behest of Netanyahu, was followed and threatened by the Israeli intelligence service Mossad. The 2 journalists were not able to publish their story in Israel, but managed to get it published in the UK through The Guardian and in Germany through Süddeutsche Zeitung. And the successor of that chief prosecutor was not intimidated, and he asked for arrest warrants, as we all know, not just against Hamas leaders, but also against Netanyahu and his Secretary of Defense. Sure, as a response, U.S. puppets are now threatening to sanction officials of the ICC if they go any further. However, they're now forced to do this in broad daylight and before the eyes of the world, thus demonstrating that the puppet masters actually, are not just standing with their backs against the wall, but already halfway through the wall. It seems odd that what is happening in my criminal case is almost simultaneously mirroring these events. But I am, after everything I've learned over the past 4 years, sure that this is not a coincidence. After it became clear that the charges against me lack any substance whatsoever, as the indictment was based on a criminal complaint filed by deeply disturbed criminal liars, the presiding judge's last resort was to exchange the facts and invent new ones out of thin air. To match this bizarre behavior with more of the usual intimidation and dehumanization tactics, they were simply ramped them up. In addition to me being transported from the prison to the court in handcuffs that are chained to a belt around my waist, they now put chains around my ankles as well. Plus, they had 2 busloads of heavily armed police officers accompany the transport. And the two heavily guarded officers who drove me to the court building wore bulletproof vests and asked me if I wanted one too. I wonder why they didn't ask me if I wanted my Winchester. When I declined, they asked me to sign a waiver and declared that wearing a bulletproof vest is a good idea, as accidents may happen. I wonder what they meant, or what that was supposed to mean. In court, my attorney, Katja Vroma, asked the presiding judge if he knew what this was all about. He said he didn't, but he lied, of course. Back in prison, the deputy chief officer in charge of the prisoners who are only in preliminary detention, as opposed to those who are here to serve a prison term after having been found guilty in a final judgment, told me that the presiding judge had received anonymous threats, including death threats. Now, instead of investigating this and inevitably coming to the conclusion that this is a false flag operation instigated by those same people who are trying to get my money and put me behind bars, it seems to have been easier for these people to act as usual, shoot first and then ask questions. To top this, the deputy chief officer looked at me, explained that I'm very athletic and that one other inmate may feel threatened by me. This was enough of a justification for him to transfer me once more to the maximum security ward in this maximum security prison where there's no communication with my friends, with all the other inmates, and no opportunity for sport. I suppose they think they defused me. This whole charade is now beginning to feel like our defense team is kind of landing on Omaha Beach, except we do not intend to become victorious cannon fodder. Rather, we prefer the image of John Wayne in True Grit, when he reigns between his teeth, gun in one hand, rifle in the other, charges and wins against the bad guys. However, let us not forget 2 things. First, what is going on in the world has nothing to do with black against white, Russians against Americans, Muslims against Jews, etc. Rather, the reality is this is about good against evil. Everything else is an illusion created by the monsters who are playing the only game they know, the divide and conquer game. Second, I think a word of caution is in order for our own protection on this final leg of this war. We're all of us, black people, white people, Muslims, Christians, Americans, Russians, Chinese, etc., fighting for peace and for a human world with love. But do not forget that we're fighting against psychopaths. That is, people who lack any empathy and any capacity for love. They practice human emotions in front of a mirror in order to make us believe that they're humans. But they only do it to fool us and to get what they want. Remember the video I made a year ago about the psychology behind all the panic mongering and the psychopaths who are the puppet masters behind all of this, who use idiots and psychopaths as their most important puppets? Well, in that video, I explained that a famous, brilliant Polish psychologist by the name of Dr. Lobachevsky And his group of psychologists had found out already in the 1960s psychopaths lack any human qualities, and they're born that way. Unlike sociopaths who lose their human qualities as a result, for example, of early childhood abuse, of early childhood trauma, psychopaths cannot be cured and will, under any and all circumstances, continue to do what they want. In this case, their goal is, of course, population reduction and population control. That's why another psychologist described these psychopaths as aliens who are very good actors pretending to have the human qualities that in reality they lack. And that's why you will not reach them when you preach empathy and love to them. Never forget how 3 years ago they forced old people in nursing homes to die in complete isolation. Don't forget this. And this is why some of us need to be in armor and carry the sword of justice to make sure that we will not be stopped by the monsters when we finish this final lap on our way to a happy ending as real humans. Let me close by expressing my heartfelt thanks for your truly invaluable, yes, life-saving support. This is indeed what keeps me going, and this is how we will cross the finishing line, all of us being connected as humans through a band that the others do not even know it exists. I'm not sure if I told you about these songs already. Van Halen, Jump and Dance the Night Away, Adriano Celentano from Italy, Azzurro, Amy Winehouse, Valerie, Eddie Money, Take Me Home Tonight. And then there's a movie, Out of Africa. I think it's great. Robert Redford and Meryl Streep. See you all soon. We will not give in. We will not give up.